Hey, thanks for listening again. Now, if you recall, I talked about the power of high-density livestock grazing in my free ebook that I sent you the other day. Well, Australian Dick Richardson has been using high-density grazing for decades. However, today he joins me to caution you on using high-density grazing too often in your grazing management program. Instead, he recommends randomized events that more closely mimic how wild herds of herbivores in nature behave. I hope you're enjoying these interviews, and remember that one more is headed your way, so keep an eye on that email inbox. All right, welcome to the Agricultural Insights podcast. Joining us from Australia is Dick Richardson, who lives in New South Wales, and he is a farmer and holistic management educator since 1995. Welcome to the show, Dick.
Morning, Chris. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. Before we get into the bulk of our interview, can you just give us a quick background about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, Chris, I'm a farmer. That's the first thing about me, is that I'm a farmer, practical farmer, who later on went on to the educator's program with Allan Savory and did a lot of training of people across Southern Africa. That's where I'm from. We farmed in the Vryburg district up in the central north South Africa, and went on from there to work full-time as an educator for a while, until I realized that too much of the theories we were teaching people didn't pan out 100% in practice, and I had to become a farmer to go back to farming, to learn how to practice this stuff properly, this theory, and turn it into a more balanced outcome. And I did that, and did training on the side for the 10 years that I was at Brussels in South Africa, and then I've been over here for 4 years now, just short on 4 years, and running farms here. I work on a place where we run beef just down the road. My own place has got cattle and sheep, and we practice holistic management. And I've been helping guys who've been flying with holistic management or cell grazing and have hit ceilings with their production or their performance, or have become disheartened by the outcomes, and I'm helping them to improve their outcomes.
Okay. Yeah, that's one of the things we talked about earlier before we started recording, was the fact that you do go into certain operations and talk to farmers and ranchers that have had problems. Could you talk about some of the situations you might go in and help people with, and are these people that are already practicing holistic management?
Yeah, most of the people that I work with have had formal training in holistic management and cell grazing. Most of them have done both at schools here, and they've had massive improvement ecologically to start with, and that's hit a ceiling and panned off, in many cases began to go backwards. In almost every case, the economics took off in the beginning. They made a little bit more money, and eventually they're making less money out of what they were doing. And I've made it my job here. There are enough people giving training, so I've made it my job here to try and refine the training that people have had and take them to higher levels, if you like, and get better results and get the changes occurring again and the economics right in their businesses.
Okay, so yeah, that's pretty interesting that there's this increase in production and profitability, and then it levels off, and then it goes back down again. What are some of the common issues that you come across for why that's happening?
Well, it's important to maybe just recognize first that I don't do much with them in terms of how to manage their finances. That's a different kettle of fish. That's stuff that they get very good training on, especially in the cell grazing people like Pro Advice and Principal Focus and RCS. They give some very good training in that. Holistic management, basics of the holistic financial planning is brilliant. So on the ability for people to manage their actual finances, there's no problem. The problems actually are about animals not performing optimally, and therefore turnovers and returns per unit that come down too much. And that's on the one side. The other side of it is that ecologically they get a shift towards grasslands, they get a shift towards healthier and quicker growing type grasses, and then after a while that simplifies, and the drive for increased soil carbon ends up with a lot of compaction lower down in the soil and aeration problems, waterlogging problems, which means that eventually they end up with a very simple community of organisms there, specifically grasses, and sedges come in huge numbers, and the animal performance continues to decline and the stocking rates continue to decline, or the carrying capacity declines and the stocking rate has to follow. That means that in the end people end up with less money to play with, and therefore begin to go back to conventional management to fix their problems.
That's very interesting. So I guess given that scenario that you just described, what would be some recommendations you might make in order to, restore a healthy functioning ecosystem?
Because the first thing we have to do is just a little bit of retraining. The first and most important thing is the stock answer from most educators when they see an ecological problem or in economics that the farm is not good enough. The first answer normally is that recovery periods are not long enough. And they want these guys to have longer and longer and longer recovery periods. We were at a farmer's day, the one place, there was another educator there, and he'd missed the preamble that the farmer had given. She told us how long the recovery period was, how many animals were there. He got there, and I said to him, what do you think of the soils? What do you think of what's happening in the ecology here? He said, well, waterlogging, pointed out these problems of a simplified community, and he said, this is going downhill. So I said, what's the problem? He said, the recovery periods aren't long enough. I said, well, how long should they be? He said, at least 150 days. I said, but the woman just told us that her recovery period is 180 days. So you're obviously not on the right track, Now the reality is what happens is people have been taught that the silver bullet is stock density. So what happens is people push up and push up and push up stock density, and what happens over time is that becomes highly repetitive actions. Animals going into paddocks at similar times of the year, at a similar density each time, and the activity becomes repeated over time. Now I know in correct terms that means that the grazing is not really being planned, there's not enough shift and change, but the reality is that it is still being sold as grazing planning because people tell them the recovery periods need to be long. What actually is happening is that ecosystems are managed and are changed by, especially in brittle environments, in other words, environments where there is not perennial moisture at soil surface for rotting. The ecosystem actually changes only through catastrophic events. Things like droughts, fires, floods, locusts, a massive herd of animals that comes and tramples the hell out of that patch because there are predators chasing them up, hailstorm. That's the sort of thing that is a catastrophic event. It completely changes the circumstances on that soil. So what a stock density scenario of high animal numbers on a small patch of ground, trampling a piece of country for a short space of time and then moving on is a catastrophic event. And that catastrophic event, if repeated within the next, or let's say 3 times in the next 4 years, then the pattern that generates in this environment, because after all, the whole background of holism is that nature works in patterns and wholes. And if it's a pattern that becomes repetitive, well, then you end up with a very simplified outcome. So what people need to do is they need to change the event that they use. They need to use varied events to get varied outcome. If diversity is part of the goal, well, diversity means variation, differentiation, change. So that change is what changes the environment. And what I'm trying to say is that a dose of high stock density grazing, maybe a dose of 6 months or a year without any animals going onto it, maybe a year of very short recovery periods, light density of grazing plants, maybe even patch burning, maybe a different class of animal, sheep this time instead of cattle. These are the variations that people can bring in the event, so they can manage the events for variation. Then the paddocks will end up with more variety in it. It doesn't have to be grazed clear and trampled every single time you put stock into it. And this is what people tend to end up doing. The recovery periods become static, as do the stock densities for each of those events. And that results in simplified ecosystem outcome.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. I've never really thought about that before, but what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Definitely makes a lot of sense. And I just think about how it is in nature. You know, a certain piece of ground is not always grazed at high densities every single year by the same species, and it goes back to what you're saying, that unpredictability. But that leads me to my next question, and that's when you worked at the Brussels Ranch. And in the year 2000, there was a fire there. Is that correct?
Yes, Chris, but if we can just go back, if you don't mind.
No, that's
fine.
The
other half of the thing we were talking about there was the economy of those businesses. Why don't the animals perform well? And if we're talking about nature, we're talking about those natural situations there. The animals come, they go, they don't arrive on the date, they move a little bit this side, a little bit that side. Areas can get over-trampled, they can get over-rested, they can get long spaces in between, short spaces in between. But what also happens is those animals hardly ever, if ever, graze at a high density. They'll graze at medium densities. As soon as they're grazing, they'll spread out a bit. They'll camp up during the day to keep the flies off each other, the one's ears touching this one's eye, the tail's right next to the other one's nose, etc. Really thick. I mean, a herd of 3,000 buffalo will be, 100 meters across. That's how close together that they'll be when they're camping or when they're under predator pressure. But when they're grazing, you might actually be able to drift through a herd if you didn't have a human smell about you, etc. You could drift through a herd of 3,000 buffalo and actually not realize you're in the middle of it. They'd spread out enough to graze and pick what they want to eat. So the reality is, when people manage this grazing, they need to run their animals at a lower density so that the animals can pick what they want to eat, but then manage herd effect scenarios within that. So I believe the herd sizes need to be big, but the densities don't need to be so big. But what you do is you take your stock dogs, you gather the stock up, you walk them around a patch, you churn them up a little bit, and then you let them go back to grazing. You can use your dogs to train the stock so that they are readily used to having pressure on them and stress, if you like, but that's quickly relieved and the animals then settle down again. They say that stress is only not knowing that there's relief from pressure. So if the animals know they get pressure put on them and then the stress is not there because they know that that pressure is going to be released again, you can actually achieve a hell of a lot with animals with low stress stock handling. That's what it's all about. It's putting pressure on an animal and then teaching it that you'll take that pressure off. And we can achieve small doses, heavy doses rather, but in smallish areas of herd effect almost every day with a herd. And your herd can then behave more naturally and actually have higher performance in the long run. But continually running them at a high stock density means that the animals never truly have the ability to select what they want to eat, and that's what depresses animal performance and thus the economics of these businesses.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that just brings up your point that I wrote down before we started recording, and you said that animal performance and stock density go hand in hand. So I mean, is it fair to say, in your opinion, that the higher the density, the lower the performance is?
Absolutely, it's 100% true. Yeah. But I mean, if we run them at a high stock density today, and then tomorrow the density is not so high, then they'll do fine. My experience is, if I put stock into a paddock, I'll bring them down to a gate, the dogs behind, we'll push them in there, then they'll drift in on their own. We put the dogs around the front to slow them up. But when I look back at that paddock from a high point later on, it's like I've poured water in there. Water fills, a fluid fills the container which is standing in front of it equally. Now, if you look at that mob of stock, They actually, at a high density, they space themselves almost exactly the same distance apart in that paddock. And I believe that the paddock's not big enough for that mob until I've got clumping. In other words, I've got some areas that don't have stock in it, and I've got some areas where the stock are. If they all fill each equidistant apart, fill the whole paddock, the density is too high for those animals to truly perform well.
Okay, yeah, that's an easy indicator just by observing their body language and seeing how close together they are. I'd like to ask you about strategic resting camps. One of my listeners had a question for you about that. Is it okay if we move on to that? It's sort of related to this.
Yeah, no, that's 100%. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find these as many varied events as we can, and we've brainstormed them with various groups of people, and in the end, there are not very many varied events you can have when you've got only two species like cattle and sheep, and you've got 2 or 3 age groups in there. That gives you a bit of variation. You can have what I call priority paddocks where we'll take stock back to those as soon as they've grown, even just sort of 2 or 3 inches tall, 2 or 3 inches tall, so that those plants are being almost overgrazed on purpose, and I'll bounce them 2 or 3 or 4 times to pulse them up, and I'll do that for a season. And then another season, those same paddocks will have a long recovery period of 120, 150 days. They'll be lower priority paddocks. And at some stage, I feel that the paddocks that we're running like this need to have some other change of events. So we do what I call a Sabbath paddock. We look back into the Bible's instructions on management of ecosystems, and really the only one we could find was the instruction that you must run your garden in those days, your farm, for 6 years, and on the 7th year you must leave it alone for the birds and the animals, and the poor people could go in there, but you don't prune it, you don't tend it, you don't reap, and you don't plant. And we thought, well, how do we get that into our business in the modern day times? We can't just go on holiday every 7th year and leave the farm. What we should do maybe is just take a 7th of the farm each year and leave that in what we call a Sabbath. So that's what we do. 1/7 of the farm sits over in a Sabbath so that it gets a total rest for 1 year. It's not a total rest. All the kangaroos pull in there in Africa. The oryx used to go into it, etc. And so we've always got something drifting through. But the reality is it's not being grazed in any specific regime that particular year. And what I believe it does is that it gives an opportunity for the fungal portion of the soil to actually increase and become more active. Because with livestock, cattle and sheep, what we're doing each time we put animals in there, we're actually just inoculating that country with bacteria, and we're pushing up the bacterial portion of the soil. And the soil actually changes color, or changes smell rather, dramatically, but from a year's rest than it does from all these years of huge animal impact. So what we're doing is we're creating another interface, another change. That idea that most life on Earth occurs on an edge between 2 different communities. Mm-hmm. Well, I believe we created that in the ecosystem by having this edge between 2 regimes of management, or 2 tools. So if we've got high stock density in grazing or high animal impact in grazing, well then we need a change to a different type of tool to allow more organisms to make their homes there and to increase in numbers. So if we've got that interface to rest again, then we have an interface back to grazing again. And in the early years, I don't expect the stock to clean it up straight away. So the first 2 or 3 years, the grazing's in there, just slowly picking the feed out until eventually that becomes a high priority paddock again and becomes vivid green as it gets highly nitrified, if you like, through the animal impact into it. So if we can have those variations, then we have more variable outcome. I fit that into the grazing very easily because it's a place where we can calve or we can lamb, we can leave the animals in there for long graze periods after it's had a year off while the calving season's on or the lambing season's on. They've got cover. You don't have to bother them with moves. You don't lose lambs, etc. And that gives us that variation. Obviously, there are years when those Sabbath paddocks don't get the chance to Sabbath, like this year that's just gone past. We had a pretty ordinary rainfall year, long, hot, dry summer, and in the end we used all our Sabbath paddocks. So this next season we'll have to, go back to some Sabbathing.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, though. I mean, it's sort of like the high density grazing is offset by the Sabbath paddock, or the area of your farm that you have in Sabbath, and it reminds me a lot of Eastern medicine or Eastern philosophy. Having that balance between, I guess in this case, two different forms of management. And is that what you mean by a strategic rest camp when you use the word Sabbath, or is that something different?
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. Yeah, a strategic rest paddock, if you like, or Sabbath is what we call it. It's just getting a unit holiday. That's all. So, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Everyone needs to go on a holiday, I guess, including the land. Well, I'd like to move on and talk about the Brussels Ranch, if that's okay.
There's no worries, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so what I was saying earlier is that in 2000 you had a fire there, followed by 3 years of drought, and I saw these pictures in the article that you sent me, and there was just literally nothing there. So I gotta ask you, what was your process that you went through to get forage for livestock to start growing there and to start healing the land?
Yeah, I think the fire was in 2002. But never mind, we flew over the country so that we could get a quick mapping done of where was burnt and where wasn't burnt. And we then sat down and put that back onto the grazing planning chart, and we could work out exactly how much feed we had left. We then knew how many animals we could continue to run, because it was in June or July, and we still had to go all the way to the end of November, probably, and into December sometimes, to get our first rain for the season. So we then walked the rest of the stock away to 80 odd kilometers away to where we could find some feed for them, to other people's places. And that was a mistake on its own. I should really have just sold the stock. But the reality of how we got that going again was we used the stock on the country that was left over, and that's where we learned a little bit more about what I call landscaping, where it really pays to have a different kind of event again, where we graze country and really work it down till there's no feed left in there in a dry season. And we do that by running cows, and then we follow them with heifers that are in calf that we want to take a bit of weight off, and we can really trample a place so that it looks like buffalo have been there twice, sort of thing. So we did that to the country that was unburnt, and as soon as we got our first flush of growth after the rains in November, we took stock onto the rest of that country, and we brought the cattle back from the other places as soon as we could, so that we would get as much impact onto the country as it was growing as we could. And so recovery periods are quite short. When we got around that country and gave it a good trampling, and at the same time allowed it to recover behind it, and that's really how we got it going again. But although they're drought years, the dry years, one of those was a pretty wet one, but the reality is that the rainfall wasn't all that great, but just a little bit that grew we were able to go back and use, and that's what helped the country right pretty quickly.
Okay, so there was just a little bit, there was something there for the livestock to graze before you went in.
Yeah, we waited until we had feed for them. We couldn't have put them in there before that. There would have been nothing there. So we had to wait for it to grow. But I think the secret was getting the stock in there pretty soon. If you go driving to Botswana or one of those open grazing native sort of country where there's just wild animals and open country, you see what happens when there's a burn, there's a lightning fire, or somebody's hunting for bees and honey or something, and they've set the place alight. All the game and the whole region come and camp on that black burnt patch. And what they're after there, it seems to me, is the minerals that have been tied up all these years in the plant material, that are now being allowed to be freed into an ash form, and that's what they're there for. So, I understand that in nature, a burn means everybody pitches up onto that burn and actually tramples the hell out of it and overgrazes everything that's trying to grow out of it. So we obviously didn't want to do that to the whole place, and we couldn't have. It would have limited too much the production. So what we had to do was approach it with the normal paddocks and go to each one as soon as we could, though, but move them around so that there was time for recovery as well to build more material.
Yeah, you bring up a good point there, and that's something that I've wondered about. And I guess I've learned a little bit about what fire does to the landscape if you keep burning every year over and over. You're from South Africa, so you know how common that is there. What is your opinion on fire? Is there a place for fire in our toolbox?
You know, if you remember what I was talking about earlier on with events, repetitive events will always simplify the community. There's huge hectarage in South Africa that's burnt every single year just to get fresh regrowth so that stock can go on it. It's very, very, very devastating in terms of how it simplifies the community and bears the soil and increases the erosion, etc. But on the other hand, if fire was used as a every now and again event to change the pattern of use that it's had up until then, to me, fire would work quite well. But the reality is that fire should then just be used in small patch burns so that it really concentrates the animals on those burns and gives you a lot of trample. The tendency is to burn thousands of hectares, where I'm sort of suggesting that if you've got a herd of 500 cows or 1,000 cows in one mob, you wouldn't really want to burn more than half a hectare or a hectare a day, and that would just concentrate the animals on those little patches and create the impact and the shift that you're looking at. And to me, that would be a more natural way of using fire. I know naturally there would also have been odd raging really big fire, but because animal numbers got so high, those fires would have been limited in the area that they traveled, in my view. And I think that fire is a very good tool, but again, it's like all these tools. Repetitive, ad nauseum use results in simplification and desertification. If you use it very seldom and you change it around with other management practices, then you'll end up with more diversity. Because after all, diversity is about a mosaic of variety, and fire is just one of those.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm glad you pointed that out. Now, I'd like to move on to the method of measuring forage, and that's STAC or stack. Do you feel like talking about that right now?
Yeah, that's no problem. Yeah, I got the idea from some chaps up in the northeast of the US, where they'd always used pasture meters to measure their grazing, how much grazing they had available, and they'd obviously just simplified it over the years to measuring it up the side of their boot. So the stack is sole, toe, ankle, calf, and that height meant there were X many kilograms of feed available in that paddock if it was a solid sward of grass and you couldn't see through it at that height. I just had to translate that into kilograms first of all, and then into stock units, etc. And we worked that out at 30, 60, 90, and 120 stock days per hectare. So that's your normal stock unit at 450 kg unit. So once we'd done that, we were fine. But then we had to do a bit more translation on how to get that to work in more arid environments than the northeast of the state, where we would have maybe 1 footfall would be on a bare ground patch, or 1 foot on a shrub, or one in the next one on top of an anthill or a rock, and you can't obviously count every footfall. So we actually just learned to do it with percentages. We take 10 steps and we look at the patch next to your foot and we rate that one and we add that up to give us the percentage of 120 or percentage of 90, and that's how we got it to work. And that we can do it on horseback. I do it a lot on horseback. You can do it as a vehicle with the marks on the tires. It's a pretty simple method to do, and it's quick, and it takes out a lot of the inaccuracies that come in with the normal square method of people judging their paddocks. It's very accurate in mid-range, but it's highly inaccurate when there's a lot of feed, and it's highly inaccurate when there's very little feed around, whereas the stack method tends to be simple and pretty accurate most of the time.
Okay, so how many of these 10-step sets would you take to get an accurate measure of forage? I mean, would you do this for, take 10 different samples or 100 different samples?
It really depends on the topography in that paddock. I mean, if you just get off your horse, walk in a circle, and do 3 sets of 10, and the paddock is uniform, well, you've got enough information. If you have got very non-uniform country, then you'd need to do those same sets of 3 in 3 different spots. It really depends on the paddock and the size of the paddock and all that sort of thing. So what we tend to do is the first 5 or 6 paddocks, we'll always do it together, 2 of us, and the first 5 or 6 paddocks, we'll measure every one, and then all the varied spots, and then after that we can travel a lot quicker because you've now got your mind calibrated. You drive through, so that was the same as that paddock, that's the same as that paddock, and you don't have to do it in every single paddock. But the reality is that if the country is uniform, you do that one spot. I always do 3 just to give me an average. But if it's uniform, you can take that for the whole paddock. If it's not, you'll have to do that in each varied type of topography in that paddock.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Now, can this method be used at any time of the year, or do you particularly like to do it during a certain time of the year?
You can probably use it any time. What we tend to do is every time it dries off and growth's coming to an end, we do the stack method to recalibrate how much feed we've got on the property at the time, so we can then forecast how long that feed needs to last for, because this area has an average of 2 inches, 50 mils a month over the whole year. It's all the same, but in fact it can rain any time, and miss months for months at a time. You can go 5, 6 months without effective rain, and then it can rain again. So that average sort of throws you off a little bit. So what we need to do is every time it stops growing, we do a little mini closed season plan, if you like, where we assess how much feed we've got and how long it must last for, and we then must adjust our trade stock, etc., to get that stocking rate right to that carrying capacity. And if it rains again, we go back into an open season plan, and we move stock according to growth rates and according to what we're wanting to create for the next closed season. In other words, the paddocks we want to put on priority and others we want to just use a little bit of. And so then we change our thinking. And each time it stops growing, we go back and do another stack. And it's actually, you get pretty handy at it. You do it, no trouble at all.
Okay. Yeah, that seems like a great way to do it. And another method for measuring something is the rainfall analysis that you sort of pioneered. So what is your method of rainfall analysis, and how is it different from, the traditional inches or mils per year per month?
I think the biggest difference is that most people look at rainfall and there's 2 things they're interested in. One is what is the average rainfall in your district, and the other one is are there any patterns in the rainfall distribution over time. So what I have discovered is there's very little in terms of pattern. I mean, yes, there's a pattern if it's a summer rainfall or a winter rainfall area, obviously, but I have not anywhere been able to find a 7-year repetitive pattern or anything like that. I don't believe there really is such a thing. What I'm more interested in is what is the normal rainfall. If you look at 100 years of rainfall records on a bar graph, the average is actually way above what I would consider to be a normal rainfall. There's these really high rainfall years that brings the average up to an unusual number. Very seldom you find places where the average rain has ever fallen. So what you look at that thing from the side and you work out where it's more frequently the amount of rain that you would normally get. And that's what I call a normal rainfall. Then you look at worst case scenario, and then we try and match stocking rate each time to breeding stock, etc., fitting into your worst case scenarios or pretty much your worst case scenarios, and then running a trade sort of element, in other words, allowing your young stock, etc., to remain on longer, or buying in stock to get you to your normal rainfall. And then your excess rainfall years, you then have to make some more adjustments. So it's all about, for me, fixing longer term stocking rates and production systems into what the seasonal rainfall norms are more like, so that you're less likely to get stuck with animals that you don't want to sell when it gets dry. And that's the one side of it. The other side of it is looking for any indicators which can tell you more or less what's going to happen if a season has been A or B. In other words, the one district we used to do it, we did this rainfall analysis in Freiburg. If we didn't get rain of 50 mils in a month in either March or April, we knew that we wouldn't get rain till after Christmas the next spring. So that's a long pull, and that is indicated that it worked every single time in the last 100 years that it hadn't rained 50 mils in March and April. It didn't rain till Christmas the next year. That's invaluable information, and most people are not going to pick that up. In Namibia, we did a similar thing. We discovered there that every year in south central Namibia, every single year they had a dry year, a really dry year. In other words, only getting about a third of their annual norm. The next year was the same. And most people would be trying to get the animals to survive through the first year and then be caught out in a devastating loss the next year. But if you looked at the records, every single time it happens 2 years in a row. So it's obvious. If it's a very dry year, get rid of your stock. You're not going to be able to carry them next year. So those are the kind of patterns and, if you like, or indicators that I'm looking for when I do a rainfall analysis to give us warnings for what's going to happen next time.
Wow, I'm always impressed by Dick's ability to question his own thinking when it comes to how he manages his farm and livestock. By now you're starting to get a sense of what we're all about here at Agricultural Insights. Hey, it's Chris Stelzer from Agricultural Insights, and I wanted to let you know about a very special membership program that we have over at Agricultural Insights. It's called the Agricultural Insights Premium Membership. And inside that membership, you get 4 interviews done with the world's most innovative farmers and ranchers sent to your email every single month. But that's not all. Best of all, I'm going to be including 3 bonuses with your Agricultural Insights Premium membership. The first bonus is my mob grazing ebook. Well, you'll learn all there is to know about mob grazing and increasing your forage growth, profits, and production from your grazing management with this book. The second bonus I'm going to be including is my sneak peek inside my Grazing Mastery program. And as you already know, the Grazing Mastery program, in my opinion, is the world's best online grazing management training. So you're going to get a sneak peek into that for free. And finally, bonus number 3 is my famous number crunching spreadsheet. So this will show you how to plan for profit first before you do anything else in your business. And you'll also have access to this spreadsheet 24/7, 365 days a year, and you can even save it to your computer. And all of these bonuses are $500 or more in value. And that's not all. The best thing about signing up for the Agricultural Insights Premium membership today is I'm giving you a 7-day trial for only $1. That's right. I'm so confident that you're going to love the Agricultural Insights Premium membership that I want you to sign up and just put down $1. If you don't like it, you can cancel within that 7-day period, and there's no hard feelings. But I know you're going to love the world-class interviews that we send you every single month with the Agricultural Insights Premium membership program. And to this date, we've done over 150 of those interviews. So you're going to get access to 4 of those interviews every single month, plus the bonuses I just mentioned, and even some special bonus trainings once you get inside of our membership program. So do the right thing. Sign up for the Agricultural Insights Premium membership program today by clicking on the link in the email that I just sent you or going to the link that you see on your screen. That's all for me, and I hope to see you on the other side of our premium membership program. Take care. Bye.